I entered one of the alcoves, wrong again, and leaned against the wall. I would have preferred to lie down, and there was no proof that I would not. But for the moment I was content to lean against the wall, my feet far from the wall, on the verge of slipping. But I had other props, the tips of my crutches. But a few minutes later I crossed the alley into the other chapel, that's the word, where I felt I might feel better, and settled myself in the same hypotenusal posture. And at first I did actually seem to feel a little better, but little by little I acquired the conviction that such was not the case. A fine rain was falling, and I took off my hat to give my skull the benefit of it. My skull all cracked and furrowed and on fire. But I also took it off because it was digging into my neck because of the thrust of the wall, so I had two good reasons for taking it off. And they were none too many. Neither alone would have prevailed, I feel. I threw it from me with a careless, lavish gesture, and back it came at the end of its string or lace, and after a few throws, came to rest against my side. At last I began to think, that is to say, to listen harder. Little chance of my being found there. I was in peace for as long as I could endure peace. For the space of an instant, I considered settling down there, making it my lair and sanctuary for the space of an instant. I took the vegetable knife from my pocket and set about opening my wrist. But pain soon got the better of me. First I cried out, then I gave up, closed the knife, and put it back in my pocket. I wasn't particularly disappointed. In my heart of hearts, I had not hoped for anything better, so much for that. And backsliding has always depressed me, but life seems made up of backsliding, and death itself must be a kind of backsliding. I wouldn't be surprised. Did I say the wind had fallen? A fine rain falling somehow that seems to exclude all idea of wind. My knees are enormous. I have just caught a glimpse of them when I got up for a second. My two legs are as stiff as a life sentence, and yet I sometimes get up. What can you expect? Thus, from time to time, I shall recall my present existence, compared to which this is a nursery tale. But only from time to time, so that it may be said, if necessary, whenever necessary, is it possible that thing is still alive? Or again, oh, it's only a diary, it'll soon be over. That my knees are enormous, that I still get up from time to time. There are things that do not seem at first sight to signify anything in particular. I record them all the more willingly. In the end, I left the impasse, where half standing, half lying, I may have had a little sleep. My little morning sleep, and I set off, believe it or not, towards the sun. Why not, the wind having fallen? Or rather, towards the least gloomy quarter of the heavens, which a vast cloud was shrouding from the zenith to the skylines. It was from this cloud the above rain was falling. See how all things hang together, and as to making up my mind which quarter of the heavens was the least gloomy, it was no easy matter. For at first sight the heavens seemed uniformly gloomy, but by taking a little pains, for there were moments in my life when I took a little pains, I obtained a result. That is to say, I came to a decision in this matter. So I was able to continue on my way, saying I am going towards the sun, that is to say, in theory, towards the east, or perhaps the southeast, for I am no longer with Luce, but out in the heart again of the pre-established harmony, which makes so sweet a music, which is so sweet a music for one who has an ear for music. People were hastening angrily to and fro, most of them, some in the shelter of the umbrella, others in that perhaps a little less effective of the rainproof coat, a few had taken refuge under trees and archways. And among those who, more courageous or less delicate, came and went, and among those who had stopped to avoid getting wet, many a one must have said, "They are right, I am wrong," meaning by they the category to which he did not belong, or so I imagine. As many a one, too, must have said, "I am right, they are wrong," while continuing to storm against the foul weather that was the occasion of his superiority. But at the sight of a young old man of wretched aspect, shivering all alone in a narrow doorway, I suddenly remembered the project conceived the day of my encounter with Luce and her dog, and which this encounter had prevented me from carrying out. So I went and stood beside him with the air I hoped of one who says, "Here's a clever fellow, let me follow his example." But before I should make my little speech, which I wished to seem spontaneous and so did not make at once, he went out into the rain in a way, for this speech was one liable, in virtue of its content, if not to offend, at least to astonish. And that was why it was important to deliver it at the right moment and in the right tone. I apologize for these details. In a moment we'll go faster, much faster, and then perhaps relapse again into a wealth of filthy circumstance, but which, in its turn again, will give way to vast frescoes, dashed off with loathing. Homo mensura can't do without staffage. There I am, then in my turn alone in the doorway. I could not hope for anyone to come and stand beside me, and yet it was a possibility I did not exclude. That's a fairly good caricature of my state of mind at that instant. Net result, I stayed where I was. I had stolen from Luce a little silver. Oh, nothing much, massive teaspoons for the most part, and other small objects whose utility I did not grasp, but which seemed as if they might have some value. Among these latter, there was one which haunts me still from time to time. It consisted of 2 crosses joined at their points of intersection by a bar and resembled a tiny sawing horse. With this difference, however, that the crosses of the true sawing horse are not perfect crosses, but truncated at the top, whereas the crosses of the little object I am referring to were perfect. That is to say, composed each of 2 identical V's, one upper with its opening above, like all V's for that matter, and the other lower with its opening below, or more precisely, of 4 rigorously identical V's, the 2 I have just named, and then 2 more, one on the right hand, the other on the left, having their openings on the right and left respectively. But perhaps it is out of place to speak here of right and left, of upper and lower, for this little object did not seem to have any base properly so called, but stood with equal stability on any one of its 4 bases and without any change of appearance, which is not true of the sawing horse. This strange instrument I think I still have somewhere, for I could never bring myself to sell it even in my worst need, for I could never understand what possible purpose it could serve, nor even contrive the faintest hypothesis on the subject, and from time to time I took it from my pocket and gazed upon it, with an astonished and affectionate gaze. If I had not been incapable of affection. But for a certain time I think it inspired me with a kind of veneration, for there was no doubt in my mind that it was not an object of virtue, but that it had a most specific function always to be hidden from me. I could therefore puzzle over it endlessly without the least risk. For to know nothing is nothing, not to want to know anything likewise, but to be beyond knowing anything, to know you are beyond knowing anything, that is when peace enters in to the soul of the incurious seeker. It is then the true division begins of 22 by 7, for example, and the pages fill with the true ciphers at last, but I would rather not affirm anything on this subject. What does seem undeniable to me, on the contrary, is this, that giving in to the evidence, to a very strong probability rather, I left the shelter of the doorway and began levering myself forward, swinging slowly through the sullen air. There is rapture, there should be, in the motion crutches give. It is a series of little flights, skimming the ground. You take off, you land through the thronging sound in wind and limb, who have to fasten one foot to the ground before they dare lift up the other. And even their most joyous hastening is less aerial than my hobble. But these are reasonings based on analysis, and though my mind was still taken up with my mother and with the desire to know if I was near her, it was gradually less so, perhaps, because of the silver in my pockets, but I think not. And then, too, because these were ancient cares, and the mind cannot always brood on the same cares, but needs fresh cares from time to time, so as to revert with renewed vigor when the time comes to ancient cares. But can one speak here of fresh and ancient cares? I think not. But it would be hard for me to prove it. What I can assert without fear, is that I gradually lost interest in knowing, among other things, what town I was in, and if I should find my mother and settle the matter between us. And even the nature of that matter grew dim for me, without, however, vanishing completely. For it was no small matter, and I was bent on it. All my life, I think, I had been bent on it. Yes, so far as I was capable of being bent on anything all a lifetime long. And what a lifetime! I had been bent on settling this matter between my mother and me, but had never succeeded. And while saying to myself that time was running out and that soon it would be too late, was perhaps too late already to settle the matter in question, I felt myself drifting towards other cares, other phantoms. And far more than to know what town I was in, my haste was now to leave it, even were it the right one, where my mother had waited so long and perhaps was waiting still. And it seemed to me that if I kept on in a straight line, I was bound to leave it sooner or later. So I set myself to this as best I could, making allowance for the drift to the right of the feeble light that was my guide, and my pertinacity was such that I did indeed come to the ramparts as night was falling. Having described a good quarter of a circle through bad navigation, it is true I stopped many times to rest, but not for long, for I felt harried, wrongly perhaps, but in the country there is another justice, other judges at first. And having cleared the ramparts, I had to confess the sky was clearing, prior to its winding in the other shroud, night. Yes, the great cloud was raveling, discovering here and there a pale and dying sky, and the sun, already down, was manifest, and the livid tongues of fire darting towards the zenith, falling and darting again, ever more pale and languid, and doomed no sooner lit to be extinguished. This phenomenon, if I remember rightly, was characteristic of my region. Things are perhaps different today, though I failed to see, never having left my region, what right I have to speak of its characteristics. No, I never escaped, and even the limits of my region were unknown to me. But I felt they were far away, but this feeling was based on nothing serious. It was a simple feeling. For if my region had ended no further than my feet could carry me, surely I would have felt it changing slowly, for regions do not suddenly end, as far as I know, but gradually merge into one another. And I never noticed anything of the kind, but however far I went, and in no matter what direction, it was always the same sky, always the same earth, precisely day after day and night after night. On the other hand, if it is true that regions gradually merge into one another, and this remains to be proved, then I may well have left mine many times thinking I was still within it. But I preferred to abide by my simple feeling in its voice that said, Molloy, your region is vast. You have never left it, and you never shall. And wheresoever you wander, within its distant limits, things will always be the same, precisely. It would thus appear, if this is so, that my movements owed nothing to the places they caused to vanish, but were due to something else, to the buckled wheel that carried me in unforeseeable jerks from fatigue to rest, and inversely, for example. But now I do not wander anywhere anymore, and indeed I scarcely stir at all, and yet nothing has changed. And the confines of my room, of my bed, of my body, are as remote from me as were those of my region in the days of my splendor. And the cycle continues, joltingly, of flight and bivouac in an Egypt without bounds, without infant, without mother. And when I see my hands on the sheet which they love to fluctuate already, they are not mine, less than ever mine. I have no arms, they are a couple, they play with the sheet. Love play, perhaps, trying to get up, perhaps, one on top of the other, but it doesn't last. I bring them back little by little towards me. It's resting time. And with my feet, it's the same sometimes when I see them at the foot of the bed, one with toes, the other without. And that is more deserving of mention. For my legs, corresponding here to my arms of a moment ago, are both stiff now and very sore, and I shouldn't be able to forget them as I can my arms, which are more or less sound and well. And yet I do forget them, and I watch the couple as they watch each other a great way off. But my feet are not like my hands. I do not bring them back to me when they become my feet again, for I cannot. But they stay there, far from me, but not so far as before. End of the recall. But you'd think that once well clear of the town and having turned around to look at it, what there was to see of it, you'd think that then I should have realized whether it was really my town or not. But no, I looked at it in vain and perhaps unquestioningly, and simply to give the gods a chance by turning around. Perhaps I only made a show of looking at it. I didn't feel I missed my bicycle. No, not really. I didn't mind going on my way the way I said, swinging low in the dark over the earth along the little empty country roads. And I said there was little likelihood of my being molested, and that it was more likely I should molest them if they saw me. Morning is the time to hide. They wake up, hale and hearty, their tongues hanging out for order, beauty, and justice, baying for their due. Yes, from 8 or 9 till noon is the dangerous time. But towards noon, things quiet down. The most implacable are sated. They go home. It might have been better, but they've done a good job. There have been a few survivors, but they'll give no more trouble. Each man counts his rats. It may begin again in the early afternoon, after the banquet, the celebrations, the congratulations, the orations, but it's nothing compared to the morning. Mere fun. Coming up to 4 or 5, of course. There is the night shift, the watchmen, beginning to bestir themselves. But already the day is over, the shadows lengthen, the walls multiply. You hug the walls, bowed down like a good boy, oozing with obsequiousness, having nothing to hide, hiding from mere terror, looking neither right nor left, hiding but not provocatively, ready to come out, to smile, to listen, to crawl, nauseating but not pestilent, less rat than toad.